The first thing people noticed was the silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy silence that settles in a room when hope has been exhausted. It hung in the air of the grand mansion like dust that no one bothered to wipe away. Outside, the city moved on. Cars honked, vendors shouted. Life went on, but inside those walls, time seemed stuck. A billionaire sat in a wheelchair by the tall window, staring at a world he could no longer reach. His name carried power, money, and influence, yet none of it could make his legs move again. He had once been a man who walked into boardrooms and made grown adults tremble with a single look. He built his empire from nothing, rising through sleepless nights and ruthless decisions. But 3 years ago, everything changed. A car accident on a rainy night shattered more than his spine. It shattered his belief that money could fix anything. Doctors from around the world came and went. Treatments were tried. Promises were made. Hope was sold at a high price. And still, every morning, he woke up unable to feel his legs. The mansion was full of staff, but it felt empty. Among them was a maid named Amina. She had worked there quietly for years, cleaning rooms bigger than her entire house, walking hallways lined with paintings worth more than she would earn in a lifetime. She kept her head down, did her job, and spoke only when spoken to. The billionaire barely knew her name. To him, she was just part of the background, until one ordinary afternoon changed everything. Amina had a daughter named Sarah. She was young, no older than 12, with curious eyes and a calm that felt unusual for her age. Sometimes, when Amina had no one to watch her, she brought Sarah along to the mansion, asking her to sit quietly in a small corner room until her work was done. Sarah never complained. She would sit with a small book or simply watch the world around her, observing things adults no longer noticed. That day, the billionaire was in a foul mood. A meeting had ended badly over a video call. His voice echoed through the house as he dismissed everyone with irritation. The staff scattered, careful not to cross his path. Amina hurried, worried that Sarah might somehow get in trouble just by being there. She went to check on her daughter, and that's when she realized Sarah was gone. Panic rose in her chest as she searched the hallways. Then she saw it. The wide doors of the billionaire's private sitting room were open. Inside, sunlight poured into the tall windows, and there, standing a few feet away from the wheelchair, was Sarah. Amina froze. Her heart nearly stopped. The billionaire noticed too. His sharp eyes turned toward the child, irritation already forming on his face. "Who let you in here?" he snapped, his voice cold and commanding. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't bow her head or step back the way adults usually did. She looked at him, not at his wealth, not at his wheelchair, but at his face, at the tired lines of frustration, the pain he tried so hard to hide. Amina rushed forward, her voice shaking as she apologized, reaching for her daughter. "I'm so sorry, sir. She didn't mean to." But before Amina could pull her away, Sarah spoke. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but clear enough to cut through the tension in the room. "Kneel down and pray with me," she said, looking straight at the billionaire, "and you will walk again." The room went completely still. For a moment, no one breathed. The words hung in the air, impossible and dangerous. Amina's face went pale. She dropped to her knees, begging forgiveness, fearing she had just lost her job. Or worse. Staff nearby stopped in their tracks, waiting for the explosion they were sure would come next. The billionaire stared at the child, stunned. In all his years, no one had spoken to him like that. Not doctors, not world leaders, not spiritual advisors who charged fortunes to tell him comforting lies. Anger rose in his chest, sharp and immediate. How dare a child make such a claim? How dare she give him hope when he had buried it so deep? "Take her out," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. Amina grabbed Sarah's hand, tears streaming down her face, apologizing over and over as she pulled her away. Sarah didn't resist. She didn't cry. She didn't look scared. As she was let out, she turned her head one last time and met the billionaire's eyes. "You don't believe," she said calmly, "but that's okay. You're tired." That night, the billionaire couldn't sleep. Her words replayed in his mind again and again. Not the promise of walking, but the way she said it. There was no desperation in her voice, no desire for attention, just certainty. It unsettled him more than any diagnosis ever had. He had spent millions chasing hope, yet a simple sentence from a maid's daughter refused to leave his thoughts. Days passed, but the feeling stayed. He began watching Amina and Sarah from a distance. He noticed how Sarah spoke kindly to everyone, how she prayed quietly in corners, how she never asked for anything. Something about her presence made the house feel lighter. Finally, one evening, when the mansion was quiet and his loneliness felt heavier than usual, he made a decision that shocked even himself. He ordered his assistant to call Amina. When she arrived, trembling, expecting punishment, he asked a question no one expected. "Bring your daughter," he said. "Tomorrow morning." Amina's heart pounded as she nodded, unsure whether this was mercy or something far more dangerous. Because deep down, the billionaire was terrified, not of disappointment, but of hope. And as the sun rose the next day and Sarah stood once again before him, he didn't know whether he was about to witness a miracle or have his heart broken one final time. Morning arrived quietly, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Sunlight slipped through the tall windows, stretching across marble floors that had seen countless powerful guests, but very few moments of sincerity. The billionaire sat where he always did, near the window, his hands resting on the arms of the wheelchair. He told himself he had only asked to see the child out of curiosity, nothing more, yet his heart beat faster than usual. And he didn't like that at all. Amina arrived early, dressed neatly, her head covered, her eyes tired from a sleepless night. Sarah walked beside her, small fingers wrapped around her mother's hand. She looked calm, almost peaceful, as if stepping into a billionaire's mansion was no different from stepping into her modest home. Amina kept whispering warnings, reminding her to stay quiet, to say nothing strange. Sarah only nodded. When they entered the room, the billionaire dismissed everyone else. The doors closed softly, leaving the three of them alone. The silence felt thick again, just like the day before. Amina lowered her gaze, waiting to be scolded. Sarah looked around slowly, taking in the high ceiling, the expensive furniture, the signs of a life filled with wealth but lacking warmth. "You said something yesterday," the billionaire began, his voice steady but cautious. "Something you shouldn't have." Amina opened her mouth to apologize, but he raised a hand to stop her. His eyes stayed on Sarah. "I'm asking you," he said. "Why would you say that to a stranger?" Sarah met his gaze without fear. "You're not a stranger," she replied softly. "You're just alone." The word struck him harder than he expected. No one had described him that way before. Powerful, feared, respected, yes. But alone? He looked away, annoyed with himself for feeling exposed by a child. Amina finally spoke, her voice trembling. She explained their life in simple terms. How they lived in a small rented room. How Sarah had been sick once, very sick, when she was younger. How doctors had said there was little hope, and how all she could do was pray. She didn't claim miracles. She didn't boast. She spoke like a mother who had learned to survive disappointment. She prays a lot. Amina added quietly, "Sometimes she says things I don't understand." The billionaire listened in silence. He had heard stories like this before. Faith, prayer, hope wrapped in hardship. He had donated to charities built on those ideas. But this felt different because it was happening in his own space, challenging his carefully built walls. "You think prayer fixes everything?" he asked, his tone sharp, defensive. Sarah shook her head. "No," she said, "but it changes people. Sometimes that's how things begin." He studied her face, searching for signs of manipulation or childish imagination. He found none, only sincerity. That unsettled him more than anger would have, against his own logic. He asked another question. "And what do you think will happen if I pray with you?" Sarah hesitated, just for a moment. "I don't know," she said honestly. "That part isn't for me to decide." That answer lingered in the air. He had expected confidence, maybe even arrogance. Instead, he heard humility. It made him uncomfortable. It also made him curious in a way he hadn't felt in years. He ended the meeting abruptly, telling Amina to return to her work and take Sarah home. As they left, He felt an unexpected pull, as if something important had just brushed past him. He shook it off, reminding himself who he was, a man who believed in results, not miracles. But over the following days, his routine began to shift. He noticed small things. The way Sarah greeted the guards politely. The way she helped her mother fold cleaning cloths without being asked. The way she sat quietly and prayed in the garden, her lips moving, her face calm. He began asking questions about her school, her teachers, her dreams. Each answer revealed a child grounded in something deeper than her circumstances. At the same time, strange things began happening. Not miracles, not anything dramatic, but subtle changes that unsettled him. He started sleeping longer. His constant headaches eased. The anger that once lived just beneath his skin softened, if only slightly. Doctors noticed his stress levels dropping. They attributed it to rest. He didn't argue, but deep down he wasn't sure. Late one evening, he overheard two staff members whispering. They spoke about the maid's daughter, about her prayers, about rumors spreading quietly through the house. He felt a surge of irritation. This was exactly what he feared. False hope, whispers, expectations he could not afford. He called Amina to his office the next day. His tone was firm. He warned her to keep her daughter away from unnecessary attention. He made it clear that this was not a place for stories of miracles or faith. Amina nodded, apologizing, promising obedience. But as she turned to leave, he saw fear in her eyes, not for her job, but for her child. That night, guilt crept in, unwelcome and unfamiliar. He found himself thinking about Sarah's words again. "You're just alone." The truth of it weighed on him. He had everything except connection, everything except peace. In a moment of weakness or courage, he rolled his wheelchair into the small prayer room he had once built for guests and never used. The room smelled faintly of old wood and forgotten intentions. He stayed there for a long time, saying nothing, doing nothing, just sitting with his thoughts. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine standing again, not physically, but as a man who believed in something beyond control. When he left the room, his heart was racing. He didn't know why. The next morning, he sent for Sarah again. Amina hesitated when she received the message. Fear and hope battled in her chest. Sarah, however, smiled softly, as if she had been expecting it. As they walked through familiar halls, the weight of what might happen pressed down on all of them. The billionaire waited, hands clenched, unsure what he was about to do or why. All he knew was that once again, a simple child stood before him, and somehow everything he believed was being quietly questioned. And as Sarah looked up at him, her eyes steady and calm, he realized with a sudden chill that the greatest risk was no longer disappointment. It was belief. The room felt smaller this time, even though nothing had changed. The same tall windows, the same quiet hum of distant traffic. Yet the air carried a tension that made Amina's shoulders stiff and the billionaire's chest feel tight. Sarah stood in front of him again, hands folded, waiting, not demanding, not rushing, just waiting. "I didn't call you here for stories," the billionaire said, breaking the silence. His voice was firm, but there was an edge beneath it, something uncertain. "I don't want rumors in my house. I don't want false hope." Sarah nodded slowly. "Hope isn't false," she said. "It's just fragile." Amina felt her heart skip. She wanted to speak, to pull her daughter back, but something held her in place. Maybe it was the way the billionaire didn't interrupt. Maybe it was the way his eyes stayed fixed on Sarah, as if she were the only person in the room. "You don't know what I've been through," he replied. "How many doctors? How many promises? I trusted people who smiled and lied." Sarah didn't argue. "I know," she said softly. "You're afraid of being disappointed again." The words landed heavily. He looked away, jaw tightening. Around him were symbols of success. Gold frames, polished surfaces, awards. But none of them could protect him from that simple truth. Fear had shaped his life more than the accident ever did. From that day on, their meetings became quiet and irregular. Sometimes he would call Sarah in and ask her nothing at all. Sometimes he asked questions about her faith, her school, her thoughts about pain and patience. Other times, he sent her away before she even finished greeting him. Each encounter left him more unsettled than the last. Outside that room, the mansion began to change in small, noticeable ways. Staff whispered more openly. Some believed the child was special. Others warned that such beliefs were dangerous. A few prayed quietly in corners, inspired by what they thought might be happening. The head of security grew uneasy, concerned about the growing attention and what it could mean for the billionaire's image. A trusted advisor paid a visit one afternoon, a man who had been with the billionaire since the early days of his rise. He spoke carefully, choosing words like weapons. He warned about reputations, about headlines, about letting emotions cloud judgment. You didn't build this empire on faith, he reminded him. You built it on control. The billionaire listened but said little. Control had once been his greatest strength. Now it felt like a cage. Meanwhile, Amina lived in constant fear. At home, she begged Sarah to stop speaking so freely. She worried about losing her job, about being blamed if things went wrong. Sarah listened respectfully, but she didn't promise silence. If someone asks, she said gently, I have to answer honestly. At night, Amina prayed harder than ever, not for miracles, but for protection. She sensed that her daughter was standing at the center of something much larger than either of them understood. One evening, the billionaire overheard an argument among the staff. A young worker accused another of spreading lies about healing and miracles. Voices rose, fear mixed with excitement. He stepped in, his presence silencing them instantly. In that moment, he realized the situation was no longer contained. Whatever was happening was beginning to take a life of its own. Later, alone, he felt anger, not at the staff, not even at Sarah, but at himself. He had opened a door he couldn't easily close. And yet, part of him didn't want to. Doctors continued their regular visits, unaware of the deeper conflict unfolding. They spoke in careful terms, discussing therapy, maintenance, long-term acceptance. One of them noticed a slight improvement in his posture, a subtle change in muscle response. It was nothing conclusive, nothing to celebrate. Still, the billionaire felt his heart race. He said nothing, afraid to give meaning to something that could disappear just as easily. That night, he dreamed for the first time in years. He was standing at the edge of a vast open field, his legs weak but supporting him. Before he could take a step, the ground shifted beneath him, and he woke up breathless, his hands gripping the armrests of the wheelchair. The next morning, he asked Sarah a question he had been avoiding. Why me? He said quietly. Why come into my life at all? Sarah thought for a long moment. Maybe, she said slowly, because you listen even when you don't want to. The answer offered no comfort, only responsibility. He felt it settle on him like weight. As days passed, outside pressure grew. A journalist contacted the office, asking questions about unusual activity in the mansion. A distant relative called, hinting a concern over decision-making. The advisor urged him to end all contact with the child. This ends badly, he warned. It always does. Amina sensed a shift too. Guards became stricter. Doors closed more quickly. Sarah was kept away for longer stretches. When she was finally called again, the billionaire looked exhausted, his eyes darker, his patience thinner. I can't do this anymore, he said abruptly. Whatever you think this is, it has to stop. Sarah looked at him, and for the first time, there was sadness in her eyes. Not disappointment. Understanding. Stopping doesn't mean it goes away, she said. It just means you turn your back. The words lingered long after she and Amina left. That evening, alone once more, the billionaire sat by the window, watching people walk freely on the street below. He felt caught between two worlds, one built on logic and power, the other on faith and surrender. Both demanded something from him. Both carried risk. And somewhere in the middle of that struggle, a simple prayer waited, unspoken, unresolved, threatening to change everything or destroy the last piece of control he had left. The tension in the mansion became impossible to ignore. It lived in the pauses between conversations, in the way doors closed a little faster, in the careful look staff exchanged when the billionaire passed by. Even the walls seemed to listen. Everyone felt that something was coming, though no one could name it. The billionaire tried to return to his old routines. Meetings resumed. Calls were scheduled back to back. Advisors filled his day with numbers, forecasts, and strategies meant to anchor him back in control. Yet his focus slipped again and again. His mind drifted to quiet moments instead, to a small voice, steady eyes, and a prayer that had never been spoken aloud. At night, the pain in his legs returned stronger than before. Doctors said it was normal, a reminder of damaged nerves. But to him, it felt like a warning, as if his body itself was reacting to the battle inside him. He found himself gripping the armrests, breathing through waves of frustration, wondering whether hope had made the pain worse, or whether fear had. Amina noticed changes too. Sarah grew quieter at home, more thoughtful. She prayed longer, sometimes in silence, sometimes with tears Amina pretended not to see. When asked what she prayed for, Sarah only said, "Strength." Not healing, not miracles. Strength. One afternoon, security stopped Sarah at the gate and turned her away. No explanation, no apology. Amina felt humiliation burn in her chest, but Sarah simply nodded and walked back with her. "It's okay," she said softly. "He needs time." Inside the mansion, the billionaire stared at the empty room where Sarah usually stood. He told himself this was necessary. Boundaries had to be restored. Order had to be maintained. Yet the silence felt louder than any argument. He realized that without meaning to, he had begun to depend on those conversations. Not for answers, but for honesty. Pressure came from all sides. The advisor returned, this time less patient. He warned that investors were uneasy, that rumors were spreading beyond the mansion walls. "People are watching," he said. "They're waiting for you to slip." The word slip echoed in the billionaire's mind long after the man left. That evening, rain began to fall, steady and cold, tapping against the windows like restless fingers. The billionaire sat alone, watching the storm blur the city lights. Memories surfaced of the accident, of metal twisting, of helplessness crashing over him in a single moment. He had sworn then that he would never feel powerless again. And yet, here he was. Without calling anyone, he wheeled himself toward the unused prayer room. The door creaked softly as it opened. The space felt smaller than before, more intimate. He closed the door behind him, cutting off the world. His heart pounded, as if he were about to step off a cliff. He didn't kneel. He couldn't. Instead, he bowed his head slightly, unsure what that gesture even meant anymore. Words refused to come. All he felt was fear, raw and exposed. Fear of hoping, fear of believing, fear of being changed by something he could not control. Somewhere across the city, Sarah suddenly stopped mid-prayer. A heaviness pressed against her chest. She looked up, sensing something shift, something fragile reaching its breaking point. The next morning, the billionaire collapsed during a routine transfer from his wheelchair. Staff rushed in, panic erupting in the hallway. Doctors were called. Tests were run. No clear explanation was given. Stress, they said. Exhaustion. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough to frighten everyone. As he lay in bed, weak and shaken, one thought consumed him. He had pushed too far, held too tightly, fought too hard. Whatever balance he had been walking between was slipping away. Against advice, he made a decision that stunned his entire household. "Bring the child," he ordered. "Now." Amina received the call with trembling hands. Fear rushed in first, followed by something else. Urgency. Sarah looked at her mother and nodded before she even finished speaking. They left immediately, rain still falling as if the sky itself refused to hold back. When Sarah entered the room, the billionaire looked smaller somehow. Pale, stripped of authority by vulnerability. Machines hummed quietly around him, steady but unforgiving. He turned his head slowly, meeting her eyes. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to believe without breaking." Sarah stepped closer, careful, respectful. "You don't have to be strong," she said. "You just have to be honest." Amina held her breath. Doctors watched silently from the side, uncertain whether to intervene. The room seemed suspended in time. The billionaire's hands shook. For the first time since the accident, he allowed himself to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in quiet, broken breaths. Years of control cracked open, spilling fear and longing he had buried deep. "Kneel down and pray with me," Sarah said again, her voice steady, unchanged. "Not because you want to walk, but because you're tired of standing alone." The words echoed through the room, heavier than before. Every eye turned to the billionaire. This was the moment everyone sensed would define everything, the point of no return. Slowly, painfully, he shifted forward in his wheelchair, his body trembling under the weight of the choice before him. Hope and fear clashed violently inside his chest. And as the rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows like a countdown, he faced a question he could no longer escape: whether surrender would finally free him or cost him the last thing he believed he had left. The moment stretched longer than anyone expected. The billionaire leaned forward, his breath uneven, his hands gripping the arms of the wheelchair, as if they were the last solid things left in his world. Doctors shifted uncomfortably. One of them took a step closer, ready to intervene if his condition worsened. Amina stood frozen, her palms pressed together, whispering a prayer she didn't realize she was saying out loud. Then the door opened. The sound was sharp in the quiet room, cutting through the tension like glass. Everyone turned. The advisor stood there, his expression tight, his phone still in his hand, as if he had rushed straight from a call. Behind him was a uniformed security officer, eyes alert, posture rigid. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the advisor said, though his tone carried no apology. "But this cannot continue." The billionaire didn't turn around. His focus remained on Sarah, who now stood very still, sensing the shift. "Not now," he said quietly. "It has to be now," the advisor insisted, stepping fully into the room. "This has gone too far. There are people outside. Media. Someone leaked information. They think something unusual is happening here." A murmur spread among the staff. Amina's heart dropped. Sarah's name, their faces, their lives suddenly exposed. The billionaire finally looked back, his eyes sharp again, old instincts flaring. "Who?" he demanded. "We don't know," the advisor replied. "But the narrative is forming without us. Faith healing miracles. It's dangerous. For you, for the child." The word dangerous echoed in Amina's mind. She instinctively stepped closer to Sarah, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Before anyone could speak again, Sarah looked up, not at the billionaire this time, but at the advisor. "You're afraid of losing control," she said softly. The advisor stiffened. "This is not a conversation for a child." "But it's about me," Sarah replied calmly. "And him." Her words landed with quiet force. The billionaire felt it, a pull stronger than before, mixed now with urgency. The room felt charged, like a storm waiting to break. The advisor lowered his voice. "You're exhausted. You collapsed yesterday. Stress is taking a toll. If this continues, your health—" "My health has been failing for years." The billionaire cut in. This didn't start with her. Silence followed. Even the machines seemed to hum more softly. Then another voice spoke, unexpected and unwelcome. "There's more," the security officer said carefully. "We ran a background check. Standard procedure." Amina's breath caught. "On my daughter?" The officer hesitated, then nodded. "On both of you." Sarah remained calm, but Amina felt her knees weaken. "There's a report," the officer continued, "from years ago, a hospital incident involving the child. Records are incomplete. Notes about recovery that doctors couldn't explain." The billionaire's heart began to race. He slowly turned back towards Sarah, seeing her differently now. Not as a symbol, not as hope, but as a mystery that had been quietly following him into every corner of his life. "Is that true?" he asked. Sarah looked at her mother. Amina's eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly. "She was very sick," she said. "They told me to prepare myself. And then one morning she woke up. The doctors called it rare. Unexplainable." The advisor's voice hardened. "You see? This is exactly the problem. Stories grow. People talk. If this becomes public, it won't stay kind." The billionaire felt trapped between two fears now. Not just his own hope, but the danger of exposing a child to the world's hunger for meaning. For the first time, the weight of responsibility pressed down on him harder than his own pain ever had. Outside, Ray's voices could be heard faintly through the walls. Someone knocked. Once. Then again, more firmly. "They're asking questions," the advisor said. "They want access." Sarah's fingers tightened slightly at her sides. "This is why I waited," she said softly. "Because belief doesn't stay small. It scares people." The billionaire closed his eyes, overwhelmed. He had wanted a quiet moment of truth. Instead, the world had arrived at his door, demanding answers he didn't have. "Send them away," he said suddenly. The advisor blinked. "For how long?" "I don't know," the billionaire replied. "But not today." As the advisor hesitated, torn between loyalty and fear, Sarah stepped closer to the wheelchair again. "You don't have to choose the ending," she said gently. "Just the next step." The billionaire opened his eyes. His hands still trembled. His body was still broken. But something else had changed. The stakes were no longer just about walking again. They were about truth, protection, and whether faith could survive under pressure. Another knock sounded, louder this time, and as the room filled with tension thick enough to suffocate, the billionaire realized that whatever he chose next would not only change his life, but might shatter the fragile world of the child standing before him. The knocking grew louder, more impatient, until it felt like the walls themselves were under pressure. The billionaire looked from the door to Sarah, then to Amina standing protectively beside her daughter. In that moment, something inside him finally settled. Not certainty, not belief, but clarity. "Everyone out," he said suddenly. The doctors hesitated. The advisor opened his mouth to protest. The billionaire raised his voice, sharp and commanding in a way no one had heard in years. "Now, give us a moment." Reluctantly, one by one, they stepped back. The door closed. The noise outside faded into a distant hum. The room fell quiet again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was fragile, like glass just before it shatters. The billionaire exhaled slowly. "I won't let them turn you into a story," he said to Sarah, "or a symbol, or a threat." Sarah nodded, her eyes steady. "That's not why I came." He looked down at his hands, then at his legs. Lifeless for so long they felt like strangers. "I don't know if anything will happen," he admitted. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to believe." Sarah took a small step forward. "You don't have to believe in results," she said. "Just be present." Amina lowered herself to the floor instinctively, kneeling beside the wheelchair. Her hands trembled as she folded them, tears slipping down her cheeks. Years of worry, sacrifice, and fear poured into that simple act. The billionaire hesitated. Pride rose up one last offense. Then slowly, painfully, he leaned forward. He couldn't kneel, not fully, but he bent as far as his body allowed. His head bowed. His breath shook. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Sarah knelt too. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. She didn't ask for healing. She didn't ask for miracles. She spoke words of gratitude, of endurance, of letting go of fear. Simple words. Human words. Words that didn't demand anything from the world. The billionaire felt something break open inside him, not his body, but his resistance. Tears slipped down his face freely now. He didn't hide them. For the first time since the accident, he didn't feel ashamed of weakness. And then it happened, not suddenly, not dramatically. He felt warmth, a faint sensation like pressure deep in his legs. He froze, afraid to acknowledge it, afraid it would disappear if he did. His breath caught. "Sarah," he whispered. She opened her eyes and looked at him. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply waited. "I feel something," he said, voice trembling. "It's small, but it's there." Before she could respond, the door burst open. Doctors rushed in, alerted by monitors that had picked up changes: heart rate, muscle response, neurological signals. The advisor followed, face pale, words forgotten. Tests were run quickly. Careful movements. Focus attention. One doctor looked up, stunned. "There's response," he said quietly. "Minimal, but real." Hope surged through the room like electricity. The billionaire laughed softly through tears, overwhelmed. Amina covered her mouth, sobbing openly now. Sarah remained still, watching everything with calm eyes. But then, just as quickly, the billionaire raised his hand. "Stop," he said. Everyone froze again. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and understanding finally settled in his heart. "This didn't start today," he said slowly. "Did it?" One of the doctors nodded hesitantly. "There were signs weeks ago," he admitted. "Subtle improvements. We didn't want to raise expectations." The billionaire turned back to Sarah. "You didn't make this happen," he said. Sarah nodded. "I know." The room fell silent, the truth reshaping everything. This wasn't a miracle granted in a moment. It was a journey already unfolding. Therapy, time, resilience. What changed today wasn't his body. It was his heart. The advisor let out a breath he'd been holding. "Then the story ends here," he said, quietly. "No," the billionaire replied firmly. "The story changes." He made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He ordered all media turn away. He shut down the rumors personally. He protected Amina and Sarah, ensuring their safety and privacy. He didn't claim healing. He didn't allow legends to grow. Instead, he began something new, a foundation, not for miracles, but for long recoveries, for people who needed time, dignity, and support when hope felt fragile. Sarah's name was never mentioned publicly. She returned to school. Life, simple and quiet, resumed. Weeks later, during a therapy session, the billionaire stood with support for the first time, just for seconds, enough to change everything. Sarah watched from the doorway, unnoticed. When their eyes met, she smiled, not because he stood, but because he no longer stood alone. As she turned to leave, he realized something that sent a chill through him. She hadn't come to help him walk again. She had come to teach him how to kneel. Life did not change overnight, and that was the first lesson the billionaire learned to accept. The days that followed were quiet, almost deliberately ordinary. Doctors continued therapy. Nurses followed schedules. Progress came in small steps measured in minutes and muscle responses, not miracles. Yet something deeper had shifted, something no machine could record. The mansion no longer felt like a fortress. It felt lived in. Amina returned to her work, though her hands shook less now. She walked the halls with a lighter heart, no longer fearing every call to the office. The billionaire made it clear, quietly, firmly, that she and her daughter were under his protection. No one questioned it. No one dared. Sarah went back to school. She sat in her usual seat, laughed with friends, worried about homework and exams like any other child. To the world, she was just a girl again. And that was exactly how she wanted it. She never spoke about what happened in the mansion. When classmates asked where she had been, she simply said she was helping her mother at work. The rumors faded as quickly as they had appeared. Without a story to feed on, the media moved on. The advisor, once rigid and fearful, found himself changed too. He watched the billionaire work with therapists, struggle, fail, and try again. For the first time, he saw leadership without force, strength without control. It unsettled him, but it also earned his respect. The foundation launched quietly months later. No dramatic press conference. No bold claims. Just a simple mission focused on long-term recovery, dignity, and support for people learning to live again after loss. The billionaire insisted on that wording. Learning to live again. Not fixing. Not curing. Living. People came from all walks of life. Some in wheelchairs. Some walking with canes. Some carrying pain no one could see. The foundation didn't promise miracles. It promised patience. And somehow, that honesty drew more trust than any bold claim ever could. As for the billionaire, progress came slowly but surely. One step, then two, then a few seconds longer standing on his own. Each victory was quiet, personal. He no longer announced success. He experienced it. One afternoon, months later, he asked Amina if Sarah would visit him one last time. When Sarah arrived, she noticed the changes immediately. The man in front of her looked softer somehow. Not weaker, just more real. He stood with support beside the window, sunlight warming his face. "You're walking," she said simply. "Learning," he corrected gently. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the city move below. The same city he once ruled from above, now seeing it as part of something larger. "I wanted to thank you," he said finally. Sarah shook her head. "You already did." He smiled. "You know, for a long time, I thought strength meant never bending," he said. "Never kneeling, never admitting fear." "And now," she asked, "now I know strength is choosing humility when pride feels safer." Sarah nodded, satisfied. Amina watched from a distance, tears in her eyes. She didn't understand everything that had happened, but she understood enough. Her daughter had walked into a world of power and walked out unchanged. That, to her, was the greatest miracle of all. When it was time to leave, Sarah turned back one last time. "You'll be okay," she said. The billionaire met her gaze. "So will you." As they walked away, he felt a strange sense of peace. Not because his future was certain, but because he no longer needed it to be. Years later, people would tell different versions of the story. Some would say a child healed a broken man. Others would say faith changed everything. The billionaire himself never corrected them. He knew the truth was quieter and far more powerful. He had been healed, yes, but not in the way the world expected. He learned that kneeling was not a sign of weakness. It was the moment everything finally began to stand.